Hello, everyone, and welcome to Patriot Crusader Missions Christian Warrior Talk. It's Friday. You made it. It's time for fellowship. All right. For those of you who are new to our show here, Christian Warrior Talk is a Christian fellowship radio show or a YouTube podcast, whatever you want to call it, where we celebrate our victories, we learn from our setbacks, never defeats, and we invest in one another. Right? We know how hard it is right now. We know how infuriating it is right now. We know how isolated and alone you are out there in New York. Conservatives in Boston, conservatives in Washington and California and Oregon and Colorado. We know how isolated and alone you feel. And we are here to lock shields with you in prayer and in community. All right. So there's a couple things about this show that you need to know. One, have a beverage. Right? Have a beverage. It doesn't have to be an adult beverage. I am drinking an adult beverage. Often my guests or my wife does not. And that's on purpose. That's to model an appropriate relationship. Making sure that I don't get drunk. I typically am drinking what I call muddled wine, which is wine with a little bit of with either cranberry or pomegranate juice and sparkling seltzer in it. So if it looks like I'm slugging it back, it's not because of that. It's mainly just muddled wine. But so again, if you have a hang up, if alcohol is a problem for you, do not stumble because of this. Okay. You drink whatever you want. It could be iced tea, it could be water, it could be Coca-Cola, it could be whatever you want. But we will partake in friendship and we will toast one another. Okay. And when you come on, sound off and say, strength and honor, and we will toast you and cheers you and we will rock and roll. So tonight I am happy to be joined by a great friend of mine. I'm just kicking myself for not doing this more. He's been on a long time ago, back when we started like 4 versions of the show ago, and we did a police special with a bunch of cops and him as the mediator, because he was the only guy who knew what he was doing and I really had no idea at the time. But Rob Schilling is an award-winning host of The Schilling Show on WINA AM/FM, founder of theshillingshow.com, and a worship leader. He leads the worship for his church. So we're going to talk about everything. We're going to talk about last night, the commander and the commanding doofus, and we're going to be talking about a lot of issues that are troubling you all. So without further ado, I want to welcome my good friend, Rob Schilling. Welcome, Rob.
Hey, Jay, it's great to be here with you, and I miss seeing you in person. We get to do that every once in a while. You're in town recently, but it's great to be with you and your audience.
Yeah, I was just talking about that trip not too long ago, how I got to sit with you and your wife and have stimulating, in-depth, awesome conversation for like 3 hours. I think we got thrown out of the restaurant.
Yeah, they were circling around, and I'm always sensitive to that. I never worked in a restaurant, but when they start circling around, and finally they just came up and said, "Hey, would you mind? We got to go home."
Did you guys bail?
It was a great night and great fellowship, and I really appreciate it. It was good to see you here in town.
Well, I appreciate you, and I want to welcome you with our first Strength and Honor.
Strength and honor. Strength and honor. Strength and honor.
And I was on your show today, and the topic was how to protect yourself from the police state. And let's see, we got some people checking out here. Steve Raleigh, Strength and Honor.
Strength and honor. Strength and honor. Strength and honor.
And it's just such a scary thing that we even have to talk about that, right? Like I never in my lifetime thought that 1984 would be real.
It's happened very quickly. And, I think there were people who were talking about this a while ago. I've been on the air for 15 years here in Charlottesville, and certainly we've had these conversations before, but it always seemed like a distant thing. And this has happened so quickly. And I think it's kind of the nature of what we're dealing with, is that this is a monster. This is a demonic monster. And this is not something that takes a long time to develop. This is something that can happen and come upon us overnight. And I think we're seeing that sort of thing happening right now.
Yeah, well, I think it's been an orchestration for a long time. Obviously, if you want to talk about how they got to this mass, I don't know if you ever remember back, I think it was 1984, there was that Russian defector from the KGB who warned that they were coming to our schools and they were going to flip everyone. Yeah, I can't remember. What was his name?
His name was Yuri Bezmenov.
Yeah, and he said this was back in 1984. We are, decades ahead of where we thought to be, and they started. I thought in like the 50s, but they started way sooner than that. It appears, and now we've had 60 years of it minimum, right? And now we have a population that hates America.
It's heavy, and I have long been an advocate of getting your kids the hell out of government schools. You're going to be a
Praise the Lord
homeschool
on that.
family. We're a homeschool family, and it's. I would encourage people. They're pouring such poison, soul poison and mind poison into these kids directly in the government schools. And I don't care where you are. I don't think there's any place immune from it. You got to get your kids into your home. That's the best way to protect them. And I know there are some who really can't do that, but then you got to find a good Christian school. And there are a lot of churches now who are stepping up and opening schools up because they realize what we're facing here as a nation. And this is corruption at the deepest.
Yeah, it really is. And that's something that we've 100% committed to. And, both Lauren and I used to be atheists. And if you had told me 30 years ago that I'd be homeschooling, I'd say you're crazy. But now I think anyone who doesn't homeschool is crazy. And I know people say, oh, my kids are the light in the school. I'm like, talk to me in 30 years and see if your kids are still where they're supposed to be. Right? We know entire families that have been lost to the LGBTQ movement, brothers and sisters of ours who trusted their discipling to an assistant pastor, right, and to the school system.
Well, here's what's important, and this is the other side of the equation. And having been in this now for, I think my wife's in her 13th year of homeschooling, and we have 3 kids, one who's pretty much on the upper end and starting college online. But the other joy to this, Jay, and you already know this, but you'll find out more as the years go by, is that you know your kids really well, better than you ever would otherwise, because they're spending all day with you. So I go to the radio station for, at most 2 hours out of a day. And the rest of the day, I'm basically home doing other things. My wife is at home. We arranged our lives long before we had kids so that when we did, that we could do this. And it's such a joy and such a blessing to know your kids well and to have that sort of relationship, which you really just can't get if they're away from you for 8 or 10 hours a day.
No, and what you just described is proper discipling.
Yes.
Right. I mean, that's the way we do this. You do it by making because if your kids are no joy to be around, you can, you pawn them off in the school system and the nannies and everything else. And, you barely get them from dinner to bedtime. And then you're happy because, summer vacation's over and the kids are out. Right. But if you have to be around them all day, every day, you're going to make sure that you like your kids. Right.
Well, it's really true, and I think, and I'm grateful to God for protecting me. I went through government schools in Southern California. Now we were in one of the better school districts in all of Southern California, and I thank my parents for that. But I didn't really grow up in a Christian home. It was a Catholic home that kind of went to church on Sundays, and Dad never went, so I didn't have those guardrails. And I just thank God for sparing me, because I could have gotten in a lot more trouble than I did, and I could not be here today because of some of the stupid things I did, and a lot of that was because I didn't have the guidance. Had I been home and focused on the things I should have been focused on, it would have been a different story. So I'm really grateful to God for his hand on me. Even back then, he had a purpose.
Yeah, looking back on your life and you see all these places where, you know, he's put breadcrumbs leading you to him, right? That one person that started,
Yeah.
the thought process and the curiosity. And then again, maybe a couple more years go by, and then there's some more breadcrumbs at a decision point, and protecting you and sheltering you in the storm. I'm the only reason why I'm here is I ran faster than the cops that chased me, or I turned right when they turned left. And, divine hand on me, or else I wouldn't have been able to be a Navy SEAL. I wouldn't have been able to be a cop. I wouldn't be anything that I am here. And that's all because I was raised as an atheist. I was raised with a religion. That's the state religion, which is, being raised in Massachusetts, which is atheism.
Well, the good thing is that we get to give these testimonies to other people and encourage them. And God doesn't use perfect people, because there aren't any except one. And so the rest of us all have our testimony and all have those places where we could look back, and we need to be willing to share that. Like, I could have really gone down a bad path, and God picked me up and set me straight. And now what can I do to help other people?
Yeah. And, you're doing such a good job. I mean, I've been razzing you and begging you to move to Tennessee for an awful long time now,
You have that.
because, to get out of, what I consider, Berkeley East Coast there in Charlottesville. And you have stayed in the storm there, and you have been fighting the good fight, outnumbered, 75-1 or whatever the ratio is there in that city with the university. And you've done incredible things there. I know so many people who are not able to weather that, but they do trust their kids to the state schools. They do let their kids hang out with whoever they want, right? And that, for me, I remember one corrupting friend's all I needed, and I was off.
Well, it's very easy to get sucked in like that, and particularly if you're not being shepherded and mentored in the way that God has intended us to do for our kids and for other kids that are in our purview. But, we were in Southern California, and it's this next year will be 25 years, but we decided back in 1998 that California was not the future for us. And we picked up and looked all over the country, and we were kind of inclined to stay in the West just because it was close and familiar. And we ultimately decided that we were coming to Charlottesville, Virginia, and we didn't know a soul. We had no place to live, and we had no jobs. And we just we sold half the stuff, put the rest on a moving van, and said, we'll tell you where to go when we get there. And 3 years after landing here and wanting to be anonymous, I was elected to the Charlottesville City Council, and my life was totally upended in a very good way, but in ways that I had never anticipated. I thought I was going to go be in the woods somewhere and just be away from people for the rest of my life. That's
Right.
what I was fleeing from in Southern California, and I came into Charlottesville, and ever since then, which was about 20 years ago that I was elected, there's been a spotlight on me in one way or the other, and God has been so gracious to allow me to encourage people and to have some influence in this area over the years, and I'm grateful for that.
Yeah. Well, you are shoveling against the tide there, but I salute you for it. And, and I'm glad you're doing it. We need local champions wherever we're at, but that doesn't mean that I'm not going to continue to keep trying to get you to come here.
Keep prodding us.
Yeah. I think I'm going to come and abduct you or something, and your wife will then have to come then after that.
Well, we loved it when we came to visit. It's a very beautiful place, and we were warmly welcomed, not only by you and your family, but also by the people around you. And it was a great feeling to be there.
It's a great community here. No place is heaven except for heaven, right?
Yeah.
but I love it here. I love the life that we've done. It's been very deliberate, and it has been at great cost, right? We came here, we didn't know anyone, and you come in here, we're part of that wave that came into Tennessee, the massive migration. Now, luckily, it's the number one destination for Christian conservatives in the nation right now. It's the number 3 destination, period, in the United States right now. And it doesn't have the housing market to support that. There are very few homes. There's rentals are through the roof. People are literally moving to Knoxville 2 hours away while they're house hunting here. I mean, that's the level it's at right now.
Well, when you and I were talking about this when you were in town before, it was one of the things that really heartened me. There was a movement a few years back, maybe going 10 years, 11 years back, where they were trying to get a bunch of libertarians to move up to
New Hampshire.
New Hampshire, right. And they were going to try to take over the government there. And while I have a lot of commonality with libertarians, there's certain areas where we're not on the same page. But I was watching that very carefully, and they just couldn't get a mass of enough to control anything. And I think the whole thing kind of faded away. But when you were telling me who is coming to Tennessee, I'm like, this is great, because I have said on the air and spent a lot of time talking about it, and you and I have talked about it, that we're going to need to self-segregate. We're no longer in a country where we can get along because the other side wants to cut our heads off.
Yeah.
And we got to realize that. So we've got to be around each other. We've got to be in a place that's friendly to the values that we hold and to our faith. And that's just the future of this country as I see it.
Well, when your country doesn't share values anymore, right? Our entire country is fractured into basically, what I call the 3-state solutions, which is the East Coast, the West Coast, and the South Coast.
Yeah.
And that's where the values are aligned, that's where the most people feel the same. And there is nothing, so I was reading an article from Larry Elder. Actually, it was an interview that he had done. He was talking to, I think one person was conservative and one was a liberal. And he was talking about that there's no amount of evidence is enough to make them not hate Trump. Right. Yeah. So, for example, there was one guy there who he was talking to his friend, lifelong friend, who scored perfect on his SAT. So a brilliant man. Right. So not, somebody who you would think would be overly run by their emotions.
Yeah.
But he has a special needs son, and he is convinced that Trump mocked a disabled reporter. And Larry Elder showed him 3 pages of evidence that showed that he had done that same thing, that guy that he was making fun of who had the shorter arm, that he was actually making fun of him backpedaling because he had said something about 9/11 and some other stuff. And that whole thing that he did, he had done like 4 times, even making fun of him from in front of himself at previous events. So it had nothing to do with him stuttering or him having a speech impediment or being, having MS or anything like that. And that guy still hated Trump and unfriended him. And now he's cut all ties with him.
Yeah, this is so interesting because there's what I think is a spiritual blindness amongst these people because their eyes are covered
It's a
in scales.
curse.
So
Yeah.
what I have seen is this. The other thing I think is along the same lines, Jay, is that this whole lie that Donald Trump said that the Nazis were very fine people. He explicitly
Oh my
excluded
God.
that.
I've heard that 1,000
But
times. I
we
was
hear
there
it
that
again.
day.
And we heard Biden last night in his speech reference Charlottesville in his closing remarks. So they continue to peddle that lie. It's very easily disproven, but I think a lot of people on the left totally believe that he said that when in fact he said exactly the opposite. He said, I'm not talking about Nazis and white supremacists.
Well, these are people who don't care about truth, right?
Mhm.
That's what it boils down to. But the one person who kills me is the never Trumpers in the conservative party,
Yeah.
particularly in the Christian world, where he doesn't pass their purity test, right? And because he doesn't pass their purity test, like King David was some good guy or something, he just murdered a guy and stole his wife,
Yeah.
and not only that, stole the honor of the entire army that abandoned one of their greatest commanders. Um, nobody is pure enough, and they, um, I know one guy who totally, right, he's bashed Trump from day one. He's been all about this. And right when Roe v. Wade got overturned, he disabled his, he said, I'm taking a sabbatical for other reasons off of the internet for a while. Oh my gosh, sure, buddy. You can tell that stuff to other people, but I know why you're doing that because this is what we saw. We didn't care about the man and the voice and how, what and all the warts he had. We cared about what he said he was going to do and then he did.
It's very true. And I had the opportunity not only to interview Donald Trump directly when he had just announced for president here in Charlottesville. I had an exclusive interview with him, but
Awesome.
also over the course of not only the campaign, but over his time in office, I had a chance to interview several pastors who had direct interaction with him. One of them was Pastor Jeffress from Texas,
Yeah.
who told me that Donald Trump had come to him on several occasions privately and sought prayer. And I thought, if you're this horrible person, you don't go. I mean, you might do it in the spotlight, but he made it very clear to me that this was a private event and it was done in a private place, that he just wanted this man to pray for him. And I thought, here's a man who's earnestly seeking God. And I've often thought about Trump's presidency in many ways that maybe this was God's plan for his own salvation. That he was called into the presence of so many Christians whom I don't believe had been around him previously in this way, and that he trusted, and he saw the people praying for him. It was remarkable. I heard the stories about all of the Bible studies that were going on in the White House at the time. There was so much prayer surrounding this presidency, and it was a wonderful manifestation. The man is flawed like all of us are flawed, and some of his flaws were obvious, and some of them were kind of abrasive. But I think it was also a man who was seeking to do the right thing for the country and love this country fervently.
Yeah, I completely agree. I want to catch up on strength and honors, and then let's unpack that a little bit more.
Yeah.
So let's get Linda.
Strength and honor. Strength and honor. Strength and honor.
Christopher.
Strength and honor. Strength and honor. Strength and honor.
And Scott.
Strength and honor. Strength and honor. Strength and honor.
So again with Trump, I got some intel, and I'll save that for the end. And I don't know if it's true or not, but it comes from very high up in the Christian world, like very high up in the Christian world, and supposedly from his circle. And I put out this, obviously, who I work for. I work for Mike Lindell. Mike Lindell's in those circles. I was not originally a Trumper. I was a Marco Rubio guy, right? I wasn't sure that Trump said who he was who he was going to be, right? I was worried about the Second Amendment with him. I thought he was going to be the most moderate, Like if the Democrats had let him, I think he would have been the most moderate Republican in history. I think he
Yeah.
would have gotten some gun control, that he would have done gun control. I was worried about abortion with him. I was
Mhm.
worried about a lot of different things with him because I figured he was a businessman, and because like a businessman, he's used to making sausage, right? Which was why I
Right.
think he'd make a great Speaker of the House, right?
Mhm.
Because I mean that's where you really broker deals and
Yeah.
stuff. But then he started proving stuff to me. What I loved about him, and I tried with everything I had to like Ted Cruz. I
Mhm.
tried. All my Christian friends were ranting and raving about Ted Cruz. And every time I watched him, he came across as, I mean, my friend Ken Graves is good friends with Ted Cruz's dad, who's a pastor,
Yes.
and knows Ted, and he was all on Ted. And I'm like, the guy will not answer a question. The
Mhm.
guy will not, like, I would watch him get interviewed, and he would never, he'd pull that debate crap where, somebody would ask him a question and he'd answer the answer that he wanted to the
That's right.
question he wanted to answer, not that. And what I loved about Trump is he was afraid of nothing. He was completely transparent. He told you exactly what he was going to do, and I found that so refreshing after the eloquence, the eloquent deception of Obama, and all the other presidents, who Republican presidents of the past, who just took it on the chin and never fought back. And I loved that he was a fighter, and I loved that I knew what I was getting with him because he never hid anything.
Yeah, so the other ones, and having been in elected politics, I didn't follow that model, but I'm well aware and I can smell out phonies very clearly, people who are in politics for the wrong reasons. And so what I love also about Donald Trump is his willingness to stand up and be bold. Like he doesn't have the fear because he hasn't been trained that way to give those phony Ted Cruz political answers and reframing it. He would just answer, and frankly, it caused a lot of trouble for him because he said what he wanted, but it was okay. It didn't deter him from saying what the truth was. And I particularly think about him showing up at the March for Life. I mean, that was absolutely remarkable. Here was a
Yep.
guy who really had, as you said, a questionable position on abortion. I didn't know where he was going to come down, who came to be the most magnificent pro-life warrior that we've ever seen in this
He
country.
has saved more babies' lives than any president in history, period.
It is amazing. And the other thing that he did that was so bold was his love for Israel, and moving the capital, the United States recognition, the embassy to Jerusalem,
Jerusalem.
which was talked about for decades in America,
Yeah,
and
that was
nobody
just
had the guts
that
to
was
do
just a
it.
carrot that they just, were going to dangle to the
Right.
Israelis. And then when they talked to the Arabs, he projected strength, and he did things in completely different ways. Look at what he did in spite of fighting the deep state the whole way. I mean, I don't want to turn this show into a big Donald Trump fanboy session, but it's completely remarkable that he had a 100% compromised cabinet. He thought by bringing in the generals,
Yes.
he was bringing in people loyal to America. And what he didn't understand is those are the most corrupt people in the world. You don't make general unless you're a corrupt soul, period. Right? There's politics in the military. You have the military industrial complex, and
Mhm.
they are the eternity that sticks around through every administration.
It's like the same thing that we see in the State Department. The people that stick around, stick around, stick around. They're creatures of the state. They know how to stay in the lane, and they know how the game is played behind the scenes, and they play the game all the time. So it was interesting because Trump got a lot of criticism for some of the people he invited into the inner circle, and there were some failures there. But I give him great credit for not getting the same old people. Like he didn't go back to, let's go back to the George W. Bush years and grab all the guys Bush
Yeah.
had because
Let's
they
do
knew.
everybody that everyone else failed with.
Right. He didn't repeat that mistake. That would be the definition of insanity. But this is the model. I mean, even looking at Biden, who got all the Obama people back, this is the model that's been used in politics for years and years, and he totally broke that.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm going to be honest with you. If he runs, I'll vote for him, but he would not be my choice right now as president. You had mentioned in the beginning of the program people who heralded that we were heading down a dark lane, dark road long ago, and somebody who I mocked openly. I didn't have a show at that time, but I thought he was the most ridiculous. Was Ron and Rand Paul.
Mhm.
Um, I was, in the military when the Patriot Act and 9/11 happened and all that stuff, and they warned us what would be done with it. They warned us, and I thought they were crazy.
Yeah.
They wanted to disband the FBI and the CIA and all that. I thought they were crazy, and I put out a formal apology on the internet for Rand Paul because I wish he had the charisma to win. I don't think he would. I think he'd be a great VP. Like I think Trump picking Rand Paul would be the best thing he could possibly do. Everybody says Trump DeSantis, and I don't think DeSantis gains one thing from that except for picking up all of Trump's baggage. And I think that I would love to see DeSantis Paul, or I would love to see Trump Paul. Just because Rand Paul will go after Fauci and everything that went under that. I mean, it's personal for him, and him and his dad have proven over 60 years between the two of them that they hate power and they want nothing with it. They want to decrease the size of power of government, and I trust them for it. And I think that he could go around. I think that Trump could focus on everything else, and Rand Paul could fix the FBI, the CIA, all that stuff, because he hates all of it.
And we got to think about the Fed as well. And Ron Paul was virtually the only person talking about the Fed on a national level for a long, long time.
30 years.
And there is so much corruption there. And people who have even studied a little bit about this understand this whole system benefiting the bankers, and the rest of us just continue to get robbed. And so those guys, both of them, father and son, have been magnificent in stepping up and telling the truth about these things. I agree with you on the charisma point, particularly for Rand, because Ron's pretty old now, but particularly for Rand. But I will
That's
never,
what I meant, Rand, yeah.
Yeah, I will never forget that when Ron Paul was running for president and someone asked him a question, and it had to do with insurance, and he was talking about people taking personal responsibility and like, hey, if you're not looking out for yourself, don't expect everyone else to look out for you. And someone's like, well, this was at one of the debates, like, what are we going to do if someone wasn't just decided they didn't want to buy insurance, then they show up at the hospital? He's like, well, too bad. And I thought, that took a lot of guts to say that. But the problem that we have in this country is that everyone is depending on everyone else now to take care of them. And so you've got a growing number of people who just decide they can sit back. And this has been furthered by the Biden administration policies, all this money that was handed out during COVID. But all these people are not working. There's what, 11 million jobs in the country that are unfilled, and you've got all these people who have just decided I can do better by sitting in my home and getting government checks. And I believe that is the intent of the government, to make people dependent on them.
Oh, they want universal income, brother.
Yes,
so my mom lives in Nova Scotia, Canada, and they pay people to stay home there.
Well, this is coming. There already been models of this in California, a few cities. I think Fresno was doing this. I'm not sure, but this is certainly coming, and it gives them such great control. I will never forget, this was some years ago, but I think it was in Maryland, and they had the card they were giving out that was like for they called it food stamps, but it was a card. It was an EBT card, and they called it the Independence Card. And I thought that was the most Orwellian name. Like, you don't have to do anything. This is your Independence Card. The government will provide everything for you. And what it really means is that you are a slave to the government, and you have no freedom, and you've just given everything away.
I don't know if you watched this the other night, and this is a complete pivot, but the whole Independence Card really dropped this, brought this memory to the front. If you saw Tucker Carlson's monologue the other night, where he was talking about the green agenda was an attack on our autonomy, and that green cars were an attack on our autonomy. And did you happen to hear that? If not, I can catch you up real quick.
I didn't. Catch me up, because I have some definite thoughts on that, but I didn't see Tucker's monologue. Go ahead.
It was amazing. One, let me welcome Claudia. Strength and honor.
Strength and honor. Strength and honor. Strength and honor.
So he connected dots that I didn't see, right? And that's pretty rare that somebody can do that. And Tucker does it for me. Tucker and Jordan Peterson and guys like that stretch my mind, and I can feel myself gaining knowledge when I listen to them talk. And that's why I listen to them. If other people who I don't gain knowledge from, I don't listen to. I don't have time for anybody who's not going to be able to transfer knowledge to me. So Tucker was saying that, that, for example, like you see California pushing for green cars, making gas cars illegal. Virginia has it proposed right now to get rid of all gas cars by...
It's our law here that we must follow what California's done. We committed ourselves legally to follow the California dictate. It's asinine.
You guys need to get out of there, man. So anyways, California put this out, and they are already unrolling blackouts, and they already had this week had to tell people to stop charging your cars, right? So what a battery operated car does for you is it makes you completely dependent on the power grid of which they're in control of. I never ever thought of that. All these gas stations are independently owned. There's all these different vendors. You have freedom in that, going to different places. And yes, it may get challenging, may get expensive, all those things. But the power grid, Dominion Power, is a company, right? And then you go on from there. They can control whether you can move or not. And he distilled it down to that. And that just freaked me out. I'm just like, I see it. Yeah, everyone get that. And they can turn your car off with a flick of a switch, just like your cell phone.
This is what I was thinking, and I didn't see, but I had the same exact conclusion that this is an attack on mobility of Americans. That what they could do is, if they don't like something you said on Facebook, they just don't authorize your car to charge. These cars will all have IDs. Every time it's plugged into the grid, they're going to know who it is, and they're going to know where you're going. They're going to track you. They're going to follow you around. They'll know exactly where you've gone. And so this is the big state getting control over where you go, where you are, who you're seeing, and whether or not you can leave. It is diabolical, and I'm just hoping beyond hope that somehow this model gets broken, because it seems like there's a headlong push, and you and I know where this is coming from. There's a headlong push to just take all the gasoline cars away almost overnight, when they have no capacity to recycle the batteries or to even to dispose of them. They don't know where they're going to get all of the minerals and the rare earth that is necessary to produce the batteries. They don't want to do it here. They get them from China, but then we'll be dependent on China as well. This is more globalism and definitely control, as you pointed out.
Yeah, it basically, it comes down to, here's the next line in prepping. Go get a car before catalytic converters were invented. Something that you can work on. That's something you can make, or that you don't need all the machines and the computers to fix, and use that as your dependable vehicle from when things go bad. Because let me tell you, all of our smart cars that can tell us, all these different things that connect to your phone and tell you you're low on gas. This is where you parked your car. Guess what? The government could send one thing to kill your vehicle from starting. One computer signal, done.
It's a kill switch that's built into all of these things. And the other thing is, I don't know if you saw this, but it was all over Facebook and all over social media. It was talked about, and many of the national websites, was someone had a Chevy Volt, which was widely praised automobile, that was about 7-8 years old, and it was down in Florida. They went to get a replacement battery, and it was $30,000 for the replacement battery. And so if you think you're going to get one of these cars, even if you can stretch and pay the 50, 60, 70, 80,000, and as soon as they gave a tax credit, Ford raised their price by $8,000 on the F-150 Lightnings after they gave a tax credit, or on the Mach-E Mustangs. So if you think you're going to get it and then it's going to be made, you wait until 8 years down the line, and you got to pay $40,000 or $50,000 for a battery, because these things are not becoming cheaper; they're becoming more expensive. And all of a sudden, you're grounded, and now you're just done. Your car doesn't work anymore, and there's nothing you can do about it because you can't afford it.
Yeah, it's truly frightening stuff, looking at all this. And which brings me to the speech from last night. Let's circle to, my stomach sank watching it. I knew, I told a bunch of pastors, and I met with a bunch of pastors. Well, let me welcome Philip as well. Strength and honor, Phil.
Strength and honor. Strength and honor. Strength and honor.
That, hey, you're going to get called a terrorist, and we need to prepare. And we'll talk about what that preparation looks like. But can you imagine if Trump had given that speech last night?
Well, there would have been, first of all, there would have been riots and probably blood in the streets. The left and the demonic possession of the left, they look for any excuse, but that would have been it. That would have sent everybody over the edge on the left. And, I spent today, I think I took almost 25 minutes of straight time on my radio program. I moved all the commercials out of the way, and I had gone through the speech line by line. I did not watch him deliver it. I wanted to just go by the text, and I will go back and watch it. But I could not believe what I was seeing. And this was the world of 1984. This was also biblical. If we go back to Isaiah,
it's also
good, evil,
Nazi Germany.
Yeah, this exactly Nazi Germany, like demonizing the Jews and putting every pointed finger at them so that would now be a safe target. And then for him to come back today, this is Biden, to come back today and say, Oh, I didn't say that all these people were a threat to the
Yeah,
country.
they do that all the time. They double speak so often, man.
But people
No,
put
but
it together. They put a juxtaposition, like this is what he said today, and this is what he said yesterday, right next to each other in a video. I mean, he's a big liar, he's a deceiver, but the things he said last night were definitely, I believe, intended to incite violence against conservatives.
well, Steve Bannon's house was just swatted again.
I
Right?
heard.
He thinks that they're trying to assassinate and cause the. I mean, they're trying to provoke violence. They've been poking us for a long time. That's why January 6 people are still in prison without bail, treated like terrorists. Grandmas with cancer are in prison right now over this. And Tucker Carlson's the only one that I know in the mainstream media. Like I consider Fox News mainstream media. They're just the only one that happens to be on our side. And then OAN and Newsmax and blah, blah, blah is, the offshoot. But he's the only one covering this with any type of viewership base, right? And they keep provoking and they keep poking and they keep like this is what I don't understand, Rob. And I don't understand this. Like it has to be God. 22 to 40 something veterans kill themselves every day, right? Put a gun in their mouth and usually blow their brains out because they're frustrated with government, because they're frustrated with life, because they feel ultimately betrayed. I can't believe none of them have turned the gun on the people who've done it to them. The fact that that has not happened is a miracle. It is a miracle from God himself that some dude hasn't walked into the VA and done some serious damage who has the training to do so and the equipment to do so, or the IRS or whoever, right? I'm not calling for that. So before someone goes and like gets whatever, I'm not calling for that. I'm saying not to do that. I'm just saying it's a miracle that these people who are already suicidal are not doing that already. I can't believe we don't have 10 a day doing things.
Well, the level of frustration is there, but I think it also goes to the character of conservatism, which ultimately is practicing self-control. That's the fruit of the Holy Spirit. And so even though people are troubled, and some of them do go off the rails, but by and large, people at least understand the concept of self-control and responsibility. And as frustrated as they are, they haven't turned it outward like that. And I'm grateful. You're right. It is a miracle of God because there is such a level of frustration and angst right now.
Every day I wait to see SEAL team or Delta Force operator or a group of guys who just had enough, 10 dudes, right?
Mhm.
And they're trying to do this, saying that that's who they're referring to with these extremists, right? They can't believe it hasn't happened yet, right? They
Yeah.
must be like, well, how much more do we have to beat this bee's nest to make them sting us, right? That is what they're trying to do. And praise God that no one has taken the bait. Praise God. But at the same point, I want to welcome Danae to the program.
Strength and honor. Strength and honor. Strength and honor.
And then, Claudia, I'll get to your point because I saw that point as well, that it's going to cost $100 to charge your electric vehicle in Germany right now. $100.
They actually had a test recently. I think it was Motor Trend magazine did a test on the Hummer EV, which granted is a very large EV, but they said that was $100 to charge here in the United States of America. And of course, we see the upward pressure on electricity prices. Again, this is being done on purpose. There's a deliberate attempt to lower the standard of living in the United States, to lower the sorts of food that we can get at the prices we've been able to get it. We're being robbed and stolen from. I believe that the inflation is done on purpose so that they could pay off these immense debts with inflated dollars. So I think this is all happening purposefully. And again, the difference is you get somebody in the White House who hates America compared to somebody who loved America. It wasn't happening when the person who loved America was running the country. Now the person who hates America very clearly is running the country, and all of these bad things are happening. This is not a coincidence.
It's not a coincidence. And we can talk about now how we've been having a ton of comments and I haven't been clicking on them from YouTube and Facebook and LinkedIn. So I just wanted to bring them over so people wanted to. The attack on our food supply. I think we're over. I saw Dan Bongino picked up the story finally, but over 100 food processing facilities in the U.S. have had accidents that have shut them down. 100.
There was another one just within the past couple of days, and I don't remember the details, but I saw it. But I mean, this is if anybody was paying attention to this, and I mean people mostly on the left, how would they possibly rationalize that this is just happening as an accident? And then what we're hearing, I mean, Biden has clearly told us, hey, you better get ready. There's going to be food shortages. We know they're cutting back on fertilizer use, or nitrogen based, particularly. We've had this explosion of production of food. Again, a gift from God that, hey, we were able to feed so many people and there was such an abundance of food, and now this is being deliberately done. And you've heard this and I've heard this, and I thoroughly believe it. There is a group of people, they've said so, who would like to see the population of the world reduced to around 500 million. That would mean the kill off of what, 7.5 billion people to get down to that number.
Yeah, and the thing is like I don't know if you saw that video making its way around that the greatest threat to civilization is, from Elon Musk's perspective, is population collapse. He put it out there in a strong way, and saying all these people talking about it. We already have birth rates below sustainability right now, and that Japan has just last year declined 600,000 in their population.
Yeah, I had a guest on a few years back, and I don't remember his name, but he was talking about this exact point, and he brought up two examples. One of them was Japan, and their trajectory is just unbelievable because they don't. I mean, I don't mean to be crude here, but he said that they don't even really have intimate relations anymore in Japan. In many cases, it's not even important to them. And the other one was Russia, and the problem that Russia's having, and they were trying to incentivize people to have children, but it just wasn't working, and the population decline in Russia was going to be hitting maybe in 20 years from when I had the conversation, might have been 5, 7 years ago. But these are drastic, and the same thing's happening throughout all of Europe. And so you're seeing all this migration coming in from Africa and the Middle East, essentially invading Europe and destroying the culture of Europe. And so now we're seeing that, at some point in the near future, none of these countries are going to have their identities anymore. We grew up with France and Germany, Italy. These places were all known for what they were, and they had their individual unique cultures, the good and bad points about them. But those are all being lost and blurred in this massive rush of immigration. And they have opened the floodgates, kind of like they did on January 6th when they opened up the gates and let people in. They have done this in Europe and just opened the gates and let people come in. And now we see what's happening.
Well, that was, to bring up the population decline and the birth rate. That is I think the main reason that Russia invaded Ukraine. Where is the number 2 source of all Russians? Right? The number 2 population of Russians, Ukraine.
In Ukraine. It's in Ukraine.
Right. And so
they know it. And they don't
Yeah.
talk about it. They're not going to say it. But if our demographers and people who study this are well aware that this is happening, they know well that this is happening, and they're trying to do something about it. It's a desperate move, but desperate times call for desperate moves, I suppose.
Yeah, and as far as one of the ironic things that's going on right now is that the Democrats, white liberals, think that Latinos are stupid, right? They think that if they give them a free ticket into America, that they'll vote for LGBTQ insanity and bringing socialism here when they just fled it. And what they're finding out is that all these Latinos that they're bringing in are voting Republican.
Yeah, this is backfired. I think they went so far. Like there was a time when they could say, "Well, we'll come here and we'll give you all the benefits," and that was kind of the sell of the Democrat Party the whole time. It's let's make people depend on us. We'll take care of their quote unquote basic needs and rob them of their freedoms and their dignity. But I think it went a step too far. And you mentioned the LGBTQ plus and many of the other social issues and abortion. I mean, this has become the party of death. They celebrate the death, the dismemberment of babies in the womb. It's the sickest thing. And, God offers forgiveness for abortion. So I'm not coming down on people who've had abortions, because if they seek forgiveness, they will find it easily. It's not a hard thing.
It has to be, you have to repent.
You have to repent. And this is a group that is promoting this now. You remember they used to have signs. You'd see the protests and they would say, "Keep abortion safe, legal, and rare." That sign is gone.
Now it's "I love my abortion."
That's right. And this is healthcare. In fact, here in Charlottesville, we have a place, an entity called the Blue Ridge Abortion Fund, where they are raising funds so that they can give money to mostly people of color to abort their children. And these are probably mostly white people, rich white liberals who are promoting this and acting like
Margaret Sanger,
it's a good thing. Yes, that's where it all started.
where basically who was a massive racist and invented abortion, or not invented, but wanted to promote abortion to minimize Black lives. Like it's insane that how distorted everything's become, and how much. Well, it all comes down to the schools again. I don't mean to get back to our conversation, but you look at you look at the work that Project Veritas is doing, right? In Reno, Tennessee,
Strength and
brother.
honor. Strength and honor. Strength and honor.
And Reno said, "Hell is empty because all the demons are among us."
Mhm.
Yeah, you got that right. The demon crats, the demon rats, as I call them,
Yeah.
are truly twisted. And it's gotten to the point where I've lost contact with family members and people that I thought were lifelong friends because I recognize them to be insane now. No matter what I say, no matter what I show them, this goes back to a point a while ago where there's never enough data. They're so emotionally invested in Santa Claus that they refuse to believe that he doesn't exist.
One of the very first interviews I did when I came on the air back in, I think it was in 2008, there was a guy who's now no longer with us. His name was Dr. Lyle Rossiter, and he wrote a book called The Liberal Mind, The Psychological Causes of Political Madness. And I couldn't believe the wisdom in this book. And I went through and read it. I must have had 100 yellow flag post-it notes in the book when I interviewed the man. And it was simply brilliant. And it really explained the madness. So we used to think that we were just dealing with people with a different point of view. But what we're really dealing with in the Democrat Party and people with the Marxist mentality is that they have a mental illness and they have never matured. So that's why we see these sort of temper tantrums playing out in the streets and these riots and burning things down. It's just the extension of a kid lying on the ground and kicking and flailing, except now they have weapons and they have fire bombs and they're doing the exact same thing because they've never grown up.
Well, it all happened during the Obama administration, right? They got used to having their way for 8 years, and these were the millennials who've never been told no. And all of a sudden, Hillary was supposed to win, and she didn't, and they lost it, right? They would have bet $1 million that Hillary won. One of my favorite things to watch is that, that video where it's dun 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 that goes through them saying that the chances of Hillary winning this, and they're talking about as Trump takes all the states, and it just keeps going. It's such a great one, and I cried that morning, and I'm just like, I couldn't believe that Trump won and that we were given more time.
Yeah, I didn't think it was going to happen. I was with you. I was in utter disbelief and grateful because it was a gift of time because we can see where things are heading and we can only imagine what would have happened had Hillary won, how much further down the trajectory we would be right now.
Yeah, and it's just gotten to the point now where I can't see us coexisting much longer, and I don't know what that looks like. I don't know how America, breaks into three or more entities, where we share a military or whatever that works out to be. I don't know how it works, Rob. It's pretty terrifying. And, I've got young kids. I've got almost an 8-month-old and a 3-year-old and change. And those are my youngest two. And I am terrified, like what I am turning over to them.
It's a challenge. I remember, our kids were born post 9/11 and in the 2010s and the early 2010s. And I remember my wife and I, after 9/11, saying, we just don't want to have kids. We hadn't had any kids yet. And we're like, gosh, this world is so bad. And that was such a devastating and traumatic thing to witness what happened. It was such a manifestation of evil, and it rocked me to my core. But we sat down and talked we were in the Catholic Church at the time, but we had a right-minded priest who came over to the house one night for dinner, and he said, you know what? That the world is in God's hands. It's not in your hands. And he's called you to raise up the next generation. It's a very important thing for you to do. And we prayed about it and we decided, you know what? This is something we've got to do. So I think if we ever looked at the totality of it in advance and said, hey, what are we going to do? Maybe we'd all be in Japan in Russia's shoes. But I think the fact that we know that there's a purpose in our children's lives in the same way that we have found purpose in our own lives, that you have a calling, and so do I, and the people on this call today, that we know that God has the same plan for our own children and that they have a place in this world. So it is terrifying, but we got to just go day by day and know that we're doing God's will.
Yeah, and one of the things that, right, let's get into things that piss me off about the church.
Yeah.
Okay. Feel I can say that on this show. I have a big problem with the short-sightedness of a lot of, premillennial eschatology, where everyone thinks that Jesus has come back tomorrow, so they don't have to do anything. Right? I think that there's a danger with that has caused a lot of short-sightedness and caused no one to plan long-term, and we've given up a lot of ground because of that defeatism. You have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. And so the Bible tells us clearly that no one knows the time or date. And it could be any time. We're told to look up and to be in anticipation, but we're also told that, and we're given the example throughout history that we as members of the church are to be involved in these things, and that pastors are needing to step up, and people just can't sit back. They can't retreat. They can't go down to the basement. They can't just turn the news off forever and not pay attention to what's going on in the world around them, because people are perishing over this. And so if we just throw up our hands and say, well, that we're all going to be taken out of here at some point in the near future, maybe that happens. But in the meantime, what about the soul that needs to be saved? What about the person that needs to be reached? What about this country that has been such a beacon of light, that is really the last hope of the world, even though it's in dire situation and dire straits here ourselves? We still are the country that is the light to the world, and we do have a strong church, and there are people in every state that are fighting for the preservation of the freedoms in this country that were given to us by God, in fighting for God's kingdom. And that's what we are called to do. That we can't ignore what's going on around us.
No, we can. And we have to look at, a lot of people won't believe this or have differing opinions. You have to look at America's role in, how we were founded in and under God, in Judeo-Christian principles, our forefathers, the days of fasting and prayer that all of our forefathers and the whole country did during its forming, that kind of, some people believe that when George Washington, took his oath of office and opened up to Deuteronomy and put his hands on the Bible and swore in there and then kissed the Bible after that, it entered us into a covenant. I'm not saying that, but there are people out there who believe it. America rose from that moment in a very miraculous way, right? George Washington believed in God because there are battles he had no business winning, and there are things that he got out of that only God, divine providence, as he called it, intervened to save him. A fog to cover their retreat, right? Ships or a storm blows in right when they needed to prevent, the British ships from coming in. Just time and time again, he was rescued by God, by divine providence, as he put it. And I like the post-millennial view of the church conquering the world, and then once the last nation is brought underfoot, that's when Jesus comes. It throws the gates of heaven extremely wide, and I'm not sure the gates are that wide. Out of all my, beliefs, my eschatology is least certain, but I went to a men's pastors conference in the Deep South. It was called the Deep South Pastors Conference for Calvary Chapel. Mm-hmm. And what I saw there disgusted me and horrified me. I saw a bunch of quitters. I saw people saying, it's okay don't worry about anything. Just stay on your couch. The rapture's coming. Come up on stage. We're going to do the rapture dance. That's a quote, right? I saw people who were offended that pastors gave them a hard time because their churches were still closed and that they just didn't have the courage to open them. Like, the amount of atrocity that I saw there and the cowardice that I saw there soured me to the whole thing. And I kind of walked away, and this isn't to beat up on any brand of churches. I just see that revealed to me the enemy using that belief system to catastrophic effect, that people are just sitting on their couch instead of getting out there and doing stuff. and trying to make the world a better place and trying to save more souls, which is what we're called to do, regardless of your eschatology.
Yeah, it's the Great Commission, and I think this is a time for bravery. And so there are a few people, maybe more than a few, but there are a few people who are brave, and they're leading others. They're showing the way for others. You mentioned your friend Ken up in Maine, who's done a great job of this. And so when you have, it's just like you and me being in public and being able to speak out in a media like this or on my radio program, that people are encouraged because someone else is standing up. And so we'll never know this side of heaven who was influenced and how they were by the things that we're saying tonight or by the things that we say on a daily basis, or any brave person who stands up and proudly proclaims, hey, there's evil all around us and we need to fight it. We need to be brave. But it is important for us to do that because other people are influenced. It's the nature of humanity. Sometimes there are people who just wait for someone else to do something, but then once they see a leader, they will jump in behind, and eventually that will spawn the next generation of leaders. So we can never forget that.
Yeah, and that's I think what we're all waiting for. We're all waiting for our new long-term leader because Trump's an old guy, right?
Yes.
Trump's not going to be our leader forever. You know, I just want, I hope it's DeSantis. He's a young guy. I hope he has the staying power for it. He appears, I mean, for what he's done in Florida, I've seen some brilliant stuff he's done. He's only done one cringeworthy thing I've seen, which was his Top Gun commercial, which like totally was like, I was embarrassed for him on, but it was just so poorly done. But I think that guy has the integrity. I think he has the fight in him. And I think that because he's been so successful in Florida, fighting the federal government and Fauci and all the mandates and 100% taking it to them every step of the way and resisting them, that I just think that just showed some leadership that was very Trumpian in nature without the foot and mouth syndrome.
He has been a model for other governors. And I have long thought that one of the problems with the United States of America is that we got away from federalism. In other words, this was supposed to be 50 United States of America. This was supposed to be 50 states, so we would never all be under Obamacare. We never have all these federal mandates. There would be competition amongst the states. So if you want to live in one state like California, you can go there. But the rest of us are being subjected, as we talked about earlier, like here in Virginia, oh, let's follow what California does. And so what we're going to need to see is a rise up of strong and godly governors who will take control of their states and do what DeSantis has done, what Kerry Lake is pledging to do in Arizona. Like if the feds come in here and mess around, I'm kicking them out. I'm not subjecting myself to their authorization anymore. And I've thought the same thing about Alan West, and I'm disappointed that he did not win Texas. But I heard him on Steve Bannon say, hey, I don't care what the federal government does. If I'm the governor here, I'm going to defend the borders of Texas, period. That's the end of it. And they can go jump in a lake. And so what we're going to need, and I think Ron DeSantis is the model for other governors, as what I was just talking about. This is the way to do it. This is, now you've got people coming up who are emulating or want to emulate what Ron DeSantis has done in Florida and bring that sort of model to their own states. And then what we need is a affiliation of states in the same way that you have places that say, hey, we're going to be a sanctuary a city or a sanctuary state for illegal aliens. No, we need a sanctuary state for what marriage is. We need a sanctuary state for the Second Amendment. And so people are going to start coming forward and saying, these are the things we adhere to and part of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and this is going to be a sanctuary for those principles. And if you don't like it, go to California, go to Texas. I have posited many times on the air, we could do an experiment in this country where we take California and put a wall around it, and we take Texas and put a wall around it, and let each one do what they want to do, and then look in 2 years and see which way the traffic's going, which way are people trying to get over the wall to get in.
It's already overwhelmingly going to Texas. You don't need to put a wall on there. California's lost so much population to Texas. It's disgusting. They're losing seats, which is the same thing with New York to Florida.
Absolutely true. And this is the self segregation that I talked about earlier. And it pains me to have to say it. There was a while where we could get along, but it's very clear to me that there's no way that we can do that going forward.
We do not share values anymore.
Right.
Like now it's no longer like you can coexist with a conservative as a neighbor. You cannot coexist with, a socialist next door anymore. I mean, they just won't let they'll slash your tires. They'll throw, bricks through your windows. They'll,
Mhm.
Do whatever it takes. I mean, it's just the level of abuse. Like the thing that drives me crazy is when the media tries to paint them as equal villains, right?
Yes,
You
right.
know what I'm saying? Where it's like, yeah, there's bad movers on both sides. No, no. One side is 100%, not 100%, is vastly overrun with crazies. And yes, we have our crazies on the right as well, but they are so small, so minimal. We didn't shoot up a bunch of congressmen at a baseball practice game. That was a Bernie Sanders supporter,
That's right.
right?
It's interesting, and I think the evidence is there. It's just that they want to pretend otherwise, and so they think if they repeat the lie enough that there's equivalence between the violence on the right and the left. And you heard Biden in his speech last night talking about we won't tolerate political violence, when the whole time the whole speech itself was all about political violence. It was about targeting what he called MAGA conservatives and how they have no right because they have no legitimate claim to question an election, and therefore their views are invalid and they are a threat to the republic.
Yeah, it was all punch a Nazi, right? Of course, you can punch a
Absolutely.
Nazi because the Nazis, you can do whatever you want, right? It was all dehumanizing, exactly the playbook that they used for the brown shirts in
Yes.
Nazi Germany, and vilifying the Jewish people. They have everything, you don't have anything. It's all their fault, et cetera, et cetera. And that's 100% what they're doing now. And they're doing it with very unstable people, like extremely unstable people.
Yeah, those are the people that will go over the edge. And we've already seen it when we look back to the riots of the summer of 2020 and these riots across America that were essentially unchecked in many ways. Because the localities wouldn't do anything about it. But that was showing the nature of who we're dealing with, and I'm not glad that it happened. But what I am glad about, Jay, is that the nature of the enemy that we're dealing with, the enemy within this country, has been fully revealed. For a long time, they were masquerading, and what they really believe they didn't say. Like I mentioned earlier, with keep abortion safe, legal, and rare. I don't know if they really believe that, but it was a good talking point. And so now they have been completely unmasked for who they are and what their desires are. And they've been given over to the reprobate minds, as the Bible tells us that they would be. This is what's happening.
That was the beauty of Trump, is it forced everyone to take their mask off, right?
Yes.
Social media has done a lot of harm, but it's also done some good. It's done some good in that now you know if your neighbor is on the team or off the team, right?
Yes.
And the days of not knowing how people on your street vote are over, right? Everyone knows what camp they're in, which allows us to self-segregate, which I'm fine with. That's a freedom thing, freedom of movement, and the ability to get around people who will share your values is what you should be doing.
Well, as I go back to the way the country was designed, and that's what it was. The states were in competition with each other, and so they could have their own tax policies, and they could have various ways that they went about things and protecting freedoms. And so, if you wanted to live in one place or another, you could have that option to go. There has been a push to homogenize the entire country and make everything under the control of the federal government. And now we see that the left and the Democrat Party is coming after the Electoral College, which is kind of the last bastion against a mobocracy.
That will be the what splits us. If they
Yes.
undo if they get rid of the filibuster, would be one thing to cause everyone to have massive concern, because then states have no rights. It's all federal government at that point. And if they undo the electoral college, that is a reason um, to shear off. Which I don't know if it's going to be the what's that some Confederation of States. What is that?
The
Uh,
Convention of
the
States.
Convention of States.
Yeah.
I've heard pros and cons about that. I'm not educated on it enough. I know that a SEAL wrote a book about how someone weaponized the Convention of States, and I heard that used as a talking point. I'm not well read enough on it to have an opinion on it, but I know that if those things happen, I don't think that Florida, Texas, Tennessee, abortion is 100% illegal here for any reason. Done.
Yes.
Right?
Well,
We're one of the few godly states here, right?
and And I think you're exactly right that those states will not tolerate that, and I think that's pretty much where we're heading because there's no sign that they're going to relinquish this bloodthirst and this quest for complete control and domination. So it's just a matter of time until the division has to take place in whatever way it appears and however it looks. And there's a lot of things that are difficult about it. There's a guy in Texas that I've interviewed a number of times. His name is Daniel Miller, and he's the head of what's called the Texas Nationalist Movement. It's a secession for Texas, which they believe is legal and can be done easily. And they've been talking about it for years. And they have very recently gotten the majority of the state GOP on board. So this may be something that we're seeing, whether it looks like that or whether it's a confederation of states within the United States, as you mentioned, the southern states that get together and say, okay, we're going to join forces here economically and socially because this is the only way we survive. And then people who don't like it, you can leave. You got plenty of places to go.
Yeah, and to me that just makes the most sense. And again, I know there's probably infinite amount of complications that go with this, including resources, including taxation, including you name it, right? But when you no longer share values, when you and your neighbor, no matter how much evidence is thrown on the table, cannot agree, that is a problem. Reason has left the room. It now has become a religion, and the left has become its own religion, death cult, whatever you want to call it. It has gotten to the point where coexistence and just getting along, like Republicans lost this a long time ago because as conservatives, we just want to be left alone, and we withdrew, and we withdrew, and they kept marching, and they took over our schools, and they took over 99% of the colleges out there. I mean, Rob, how many colleges do you think are actually like truly conservative? Like Liberty, Hillsdale. You got any more?
I think Patrick Henry. There's a couple of others. There was one in the Midwest. Everett Piper was the head of that college, and that was amazing at the time. But so few. And I'm very disinclined to send my kids to any college. I have one who's approaching college age. Right now, he's taking classes online, and he's fine with that. And I've had this conversation with my wife. It's like, why would we take now that we've done the homeschooling the whole time and we know what sort of environment, and you mentioned there are exceptions and there are kids who get through it okay, but why would we even do that? Why would we pay all that money, go into all that debt in order to potentially ruin the child and rob them of their eternal soul?
To pay someone to brainwash them.
Yes. Why would we do that? So I think people need to start thinking differently about all of this. What are we actually getting out of this, and what's the purpose of it? And the purpose at one point was to enlarge the mind and teach people how to think, not what to think. I think what we're seeing today is this total indoctrination, and we're trying to tell you to come out of here with a point of view, and that point of view is anti-American and it's anti-God, and we see where that leads a nation.
So let's pivot back to things that piss me off about the church and pastors who don't talk about current events from the podium. I find that negligent because that is the application of our faith in action in real time with issues that face us all. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with you. And the problem is that again, there's a lot of I hate to call it cowardice, but there's a fear. I'll call it fear. And that you mentioned money earlier briefly in the conversation, like, what happens if we offend our donors? There's a fear. Some pastors just have a fear. They want everybody to like them, and they don't want to ruffle any feathers within the congregation. And while I understand that you want to be liked or that you want to have a good relationship with everybody, people don't grow without being challenged. And that's part of the problem is a hesitancy to challenge people. And there are a lot of ways that can be done, but part of that is challenge them within the culture that we live in today. And what are you doing to fight the problems that we're having, to stand up in your community, to be a leader in the area where we need leaders? And there's a lot of things that people can do. And I don't think people have thought about this, as you mentioned earlier, Jay, that, we just assumed everything was okay. We took our hands off the reins and just coasted for a couple of generations. We see where that's gotten us. And now we have to overcompensate. And that's going to have to start with strong pastors who are willing to offend.
Well, have you met Christians that want to be challenged? Because every time I challenge a Christian, I never see him again. But just putting that out there. And Scott, have I read the Warrior Soul I have not read The Warrior Soul. I'd love to hear about it if you want to type in there and tell me what it's about. I must tell you, I have recently, I've been trying to have a better prayer relationship with God and to hear from Him more. I know a lot of people who I associate with who say that they have basically 24-hour communication with God and He tells them what clothes to wear. I'm not that guy. Okay. I'm not that guy. I don't have that relationship with the Lord. I'm pursuing it, but let me tell you, I'm pretty horrified. When I originally came to faith, John Eldridge was a big part of that, and the Wild at Heart series and all of his teachings. And I still think some of his prayers and his spiritual warfare stuff is second to none. But I find a lot of prosperity gospel in a lot of what he does, which has really turned me off the higher my Bible IQ gets, where I turn in there and I'm hearing stuff. And if you got to quote the message in your books, like every time you quote the Bible, you're going to the message, you're in freaking trouble. Right? The message is the most distant thing from the actual Bible as you can get and still call it a Bible. And that's what I am finding over and over again is what's going on there. Tell your wife I said hi.
Yeah, I got a note here. I'll have to look at it later. It's not important.
It's okay. But you know what I'm saying? So I am desiring that. And I just interviewed a guy who was a former NFL guy, went to federal prison, came out, is now an evangelist and a motivational speaker. And, he's got a book out about talking to God and, went through some stuff and I was unconvinced. It was all stuff that a common, when my name is exactly as you see Pastor Seal Cop and you see a Crusader's helmet over there and you ask me, who does God see me as? What do you think I'm going to say? Warrior. Right. It doesn't take a hard one there. If I was purposely thinking clown and he said, clown, which would be totally different than anything here, right? That would have impressed me. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. But I want to hear from God like that. And I don't remember where I was going on this topic when I was going. Oh, again, things that I can't stand about the church. And you brought up cowardice or in that cowardice.
You had mentioned the prosperity gospel also.
Yeah. That, we've been led down a very dark rabbit hole where people have not been preaching the entire Bible. They have not been preaching hell. And that's something that we all have to contend with. And there's an urgency with it, right? Any one of us could go tomorrow, all the people we know who are unsaved tomorrow, and the complacency of sitting around and saying, hey, crisis, the rapture's happening tomorrow. And how many people do we leave behind? How many POWs do we leave in those camps, right? We have a saying here at Patriot Crusader Mission that we're on the greatest POW rescue mission in the history of time itself. The war is won. Now we have to free the POWs, right? And that's what it's about right now. How many people are we leaving behind? And the church, time after time, refuses to engage in real ways. Instead, Jesus wants you to have a Ferrari. He wants you to be whatever. Don't you want, like, the thing? There's a guy that we know whose name is John. You might know him as well. His granddaughter, who was 6, died of a horrible form of cancer. If this rings a bell with you, I don't know. It was in the Charlottesville area. Yeah. And I watched that man carry 300 people on his back through that memorial service where he praised God, loved God, showed no sorrow, and just rejoiced the whole time. And what I saw was so beautiful, it broke me. It broke me like somebody who had a broken bone and needed to have a femur stretched and rebroken and attached. Now, I was there with a family member of Lauren's who is about as Christian light, if anything, of Christian light, and it destroyed her. Inappropriate remarks, like borderline Tourette's came out on what we saw with the beauty of that moment of someone who took this life is a suffering sacrifice to our Lord, right? And that's the way I got to look at it. And every day that I have is a good one is great. But I could get cancer tomorrow. My daughter could get abducted tomorrow and have something happen. She could get cancer. She could get mauled by a bear. I don't know. Bad things happen in this world. And we think as Christians that because we love Jesus, we're going to have this easy ride, which is the complete opposite of what the Bible shows.
Well, it tells us that we're going to be targeted because of this, and that there will be divisions even within our families, and certainly I've witnessed that. I know you've witnessed it as well, and so it's the cross that we bear, but there's joy in it, and joy doesn't mean that we're always happy, but it means that we understand our relationship with God and find peace in it. And so it's funny that you mentioned this. I know another guy named John, and it was some years ago, maybe 15 years ago, that his wife passed away, and she was relatively young at the time. And I remember going to this funeral. At the time, I was still in the Catholic Church, and the Catholic funerals, they're dirges, and there's no joy there at all, and no one even has certainty of their salvation in those situations. And so I went to John's wife's funeral, and it was a celebration, and nobody was unhappy, and he wasn't crying, and he was just joyful about it because he knew where his wife was, and he was at total peace. It's not that he didn't miss her. It's not that he wasn't sad, but he knew this was a celebration of her rejoining her creator in heaven. And he was totally confident. And that was the first time I'd seen a service like that. And it hit me the same way that it hit you. It was absolutely remarkable to see that sort of faith modeled. And it definitely changed me.
Yeah, and that's the part I think we need to understand. Like, tragedy is going to happen. We're all going to die, right?
Yes.
Every one of us is going to die unless God comes tomorrow and
Yes.
the rapture is correct. But odds are every one of us is going to die, and very few of us are going to choose when and where. And life is about suffering and tragedy and all these things, and how we bear that, and how we survive that, and how we endure through that in Jesus Christ is our testimony, which is which is the sermon of our life. Every one of our lives should be a sermon, and that is what it is. And so many people just don't get that. They just think that, Jesus is a self-help coach. Like, nothing upsets me more than the Jesus bro culture, where Jesus is my friend and this and that, and I elevate myself to be eye to eye with Jesus instead of being on my knees looking up at Jesus. Right now, Jesus is my Lord and Savior and my King. I don't walk up to my King and high five, bro.
No.
Right, but that is what we have in a lot of churches. Go ahead.
Yeah, there was a T-shirt. I remember going back to my days in Los Angeles, and people used to wear this shirt around, and part of it probably just had to do with the culture that was there. But it said, "Jesus is my homeboy," and I don't think they were intentionally trying to mock Christ, but it was the inappropriate relationship. It took all of the awe and the fear of God and out of the equation, and did exactly what you said. It's just like, I just walk up and he's my homeboy, and yeah, hey Jesus, what's going on, type of thing. And it's the wrong way to look at it. I think that we need to always be mindful of the fact that God created everything around us. He created us. There are no guarantees. And the other thing I would say about our own testimonies, as I look back on the many painful times in my own life, and I'm sure any of us, you could do the same, and anybody who's on the call right now could do the same thing, and say that, that was hard, but in some ways I don't regret what God brought me through, because it prepared me. It made me ripe for the position that God had in my life at that time, or something that was to come that I was not aware of, and that I never could have accomplished without having lived through that, as painful and difficult as it was.
Yeah, I've been going through a lot of Bodhi Baucham's works, and in one of his pieces, he's talking about the tools that God uses on you to make you more like Christ. And one of them is my stupid dog Odipop, who teaches me patience. Right. He is a pit bull and my Solomon bull, who was trying to get out tonight, and the pigs that got out again tonight, and a bunch of other things that went on. These are all things designed to teach me patience. And I'm still failing, Rob, right? I'm still an impatient man, and I'm still like, I look at some pastors and I look at how tight they're wired, and how they never let it slip off their face and what they're going on. And and I hope that's how their life is all the time. But I look at myself, and I got to get up there every Sunday and give a lecture and talk about how I failed that week, right? I have to repent for it, and where I struggled, where because I figured if I'm doing that, then they have to be doing it too, right?
Yeah, that's the challenge. And I think it's the willingness to expose yourself for being human. And I see a lot of pastors that are just not willing to do that. They want to put on this perfect image. And I'm not criticizing them for it because they may have various reasons for doing it. Some of them may be they're defrauding people, but others just may think, hey, if I let the cracks show, I'm going to let people down. And it's not the case, but I understand why somebody might feel like that if they don't have a full understanding of, hey, I'm a person just like every one of the heroes in the Bible. We talked about David earlier, and look what a flawed individual, but a man after God's own heart. And we talk about Moses, and we talk about every figure in the Bible outside of Jesus. And the ones that God always used, they had tremendous flaws, and they fell down, and they had hard days, hard weeks, hard years, hard relationships, all of these challenges that they had in their lives. But it's what God used to refine them and to sharpen them and to get them to the level that they needed to be to deal with the next challenge. So it's just a function of living in this fallen world that we have to deal with these things. But the more that we can be at peace with it, and then continue to try to better ourselves in the way that Jesus wants us to, the better off we'll be.
Yeah, I think it comes down to where I think a lot of the misleading is, and you're a worship leader, so you choose your songs and all these other things. And there's not a lot of fear of the Lord songs, right? I mean, I've got, for example, here, I've got Spurgeon's own hymn book, which is, if you don't own this, go get it. It's epic. It is beautiful. It is epic. If I pull it open, I'll just read you the first hymn from Psalm 1, right? And it puts everything in context compared to what we have in a lot of modern churchianity, Christianity, Jesus bro culture. Blessed is the man who shuns the place where sinners love to meet, who fears the tread of wicked ways and hates the scoffer's seat. But in the statutes of the Lord, he places chief delights. By day he reads or hears the word and meditates by night. He, like a plant of generous kind, by living waters set, safe from the storms and blasting winds, enjoys a peaceful state. Green as the leaf and ever fair shall his profession shine, while fruits of holiness appear like clusters on the vine. Not so is the impious and the unjust, what vain designs they form. Their hopes are blown away like dust or chaff before the storm. Sinners in judgment shall not stand amongst the sons of grace, when Christ the judge and his right hand appoints his saints a place. His eye beholds the path they tread, his hearts approve it well. But crooked ways of sinners lead down to the gates of hell. That in those 7 lines is just so good. It's so good. It's the entirety of the gospel in 7 lines.
It's truly inspired, and we think of the Holy Spirit who moved upon the composers of all of these hymns. And there's wonderful backstories to so many of the composers and the troubles and tribulations that they had in their own lives. We would think, in hearing these great statements of faith and this outpouring of creativity through the Holy Spirit, that these people themselves had perfect lives, and quite the opposite is true in almost every case. And so it's really remarkable not only to see the work that they did, but to learn the stories of the people and what was behind the writing of these hymns.
Yeah, it's just when you listen, like, for example, there's a lot of you're a good father, it's who you are, and all these other things, and they perpetuate these things. And again, I'm not saying that God isn't a good father. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying this life is not the measure. The eternity is the measure, right? There are kids dying in cancer wards right now at 3, 5, 6, 7, 2, 18 months, right? All these things. There's horrible suffering on this world. And if you understand that this world is a sacrifice, and how you handle in a challenge and what you're going to have to go through, and it gives you a chance to shine Christ in the darkness of it all, that if you start looking at it that way, it changes everything. But if you look at it the other way, when things go wrong, when things go wrong, when you're a kid, like when my kid had autism, I was on the "you're a good father, it's who you are," and all these other things that are out there. And I'm like, wait a minute, I became a Christian. My son has autism, and it wrecked me because I wasn't prepared. I didn't have the right framing of it. Right. And I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I think a lot of us look at it, well, we accept Christ and all of a sudden everything's going to be perfect, and that's the deception that a lot of people are under. And then when that fails, then you look, say, well, did I do something wrong? Did I not accept him the right way, or is he mad, or I'm not in his favor right now? As opposed to just understanding that we're going to have these rough patches in our lives, that there's going to be the sacrifice that you mentioned, that this is going to be a challenge for us because we're living in a sinful and a fallen world, and we're living under this curse. And so that's why talked about joy earlier, that we have to find joy, and the peace that surpasses understanding that we're promised. That's really that's the elusive thing to the world. So I once had a friend, and I love this guy, but it was an interesting situation. He said, I want to have lunch with you. And I'd known him for maybe 10 years at the time. He said, I want to have lunch with you. So let's get together one day and have lunch. And so he sat me down and he said, Rob, I noticed there's a piece about you. And he goes, I know you have faith, but aside from your faith, what is it that gives you the peace? And I said, John,
Nothing.
I said, that's what it is. And he didn't want to hear it. And he just kind of turned away.
He
And it's
wanted
like,
a self-help book.
that's what he wanted. And so it was interesting to me that he realized, he knew, because he said it, like, you have this peace and you have this faith, but he just refused to accept that the two of those things were completely intertwined with each other, despite the fact that, whatever difficult things were going on in my life at the time and continue to go on in my life. And ultimately I was very sad about it, because this is a guy that really struggles. He's got his family was mostly killed off in the Holocaust, and so
Mm.
he's a son of a survivor of the Holocaust. And he just can't come to peace with the world, but he doesn't want to hear about the gospel. And I feel bad, because I love him, he's a dear friend of mine, but he just blocks that part out. He doesn't want to hear it.
Yeah, it's amazing to me that, again, people think, when Jesus called like his friends were the disciples, right? These are the people who were traveling with him. They were chopping wood with him. They were on the road with him, cooking for him, cooking with him, laughing with him, you know, all the things that we don't get to see normally, right? Which I think The Chosen has done a really good job at showing life. And I'd love to get into that again and get your take on that project.
Yes.
Um, but all of them except one, and he had a very rough go before then, died horribly.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Died horribly, right? Which served a purpose, right? Because they died horribly and they refused to renounce Jesus, which is one of the proving points of the gospel when people testify on why the Bible's true.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So if Jesus's best friends got a rough ride, I don't think that means that we're all going to get a good ride. Like the martyrs, like when we get in heaven, I know, again, I don't know what your thought is in this, but there's going to be tiers, I believe, in heaven, meaning that, there's going to be lowest in heaven and highest in heaven, and the 7-year-old who wouldn't deny Christ when ISIS was there and they shot him in the stomach and told him to deny Christ and he didn't. That guy's going to be up there, right? That guy's going to be up there. And then there's going to be people who are, well, I believe and I've got fire insurance and, again, but it's never cost me anything.
Right.
Like that's the thing that I'm terrified of, is that my faith is never going to cost me. And it's already cost me contracts and it's cost me business and it's cost me to be a pariah from parts of my family and friends and everything else. And let me tell you something I was never prepared for, on how lonely it is as a pastor.
That's something that most people don't understand. And I've certainly heard that expressed in ways from my own pastor. And it's just that we're not there. We're not walking with you. And I've heard enough from not only talking to you, but also talking to my own pastor and other pastors to have some understanding of it. But if that's your life, in other words, I'm a worship leader, but I walk in in different worlds during the day. I'm on the radio and I'm writing a blog and engaged in these political spiritual battles. But the pastor doesn't walk away. The pastor's there 24/7. So, and you're dealing mostly with the various tragedies of life. So people are calling you when everything goes wrong. You've been a police officer also, which is a similar experience. Like you're the guy that gets called when things are bad, and you've got to hold it together. So where's the person who's cradling you when you've had a hard day? And so
Yeah.
I would encourage people who are listening right now to have that understanding the best you can, and try to be that person for your pastor that just, hey, just checking to see how you're doing today. You're on my heart. I'm praying for you. Just out of the clear blue sky for no reason, to call the pastor and a couple words of encouragement, ask a couple questions, be a listening ear, because you're right. That's a lonely place to be, because everyone's coming to you with their own issues, and that's fine. God's put you in this place for a reason, but who do you go to? And so
Well,
it's important for people to be there for you as well.
and the thing is, you love so hard, right?
Yeah.
You love so
Mhm.
hard as a pastor, where you treat them like they're your best friend,
Yeah.
and they treat you as a commodity, like their
Mm,
lawyer or their doctor,
mm,
and then they're here for a season, and then and you're just like, man, I just lost part of my soul. You know, you
yes.
just like it's just been amazing to me. The thing that I find that has been remarkable is I have found more loyalty, more grace, more forgiveness in my atheist past than
Mm.
I found in the Christian community. Right? Everybody wants grace, but they refuse to give it.
That's a sad commentary on where we're at, and I think it shows the need for teaching in this area, and for Christian education on the importance of grace and what grace is, and that this is not a one-way street, that you're called to give as well as to receive it. And I think a lot of people are just very focused on the receiving end, like what's in it for me. And it's a wonderful thing that we have unmerited favor like that from Jesus, which is what we're promised. But then we are to practice the same thing in our own lives. And no one's saying it's easy. It's a really hard thing to do sometimes, but I think it needs to be, in order for us to practice it, Jay, that it needs to be in the forefront of our minds, that we need to be thinking about it constantly. And how can I express this? How can I practice this? Not just when does it come up? We need to be thinking in advance. Hey, what if, what if we spent some time thinking about things that could go wrong that day before they happen, and say, if I have this meeting scheduled with my boss and all of a sudden something really goes wrong, how can I be prepared to offer grace in that situation and have a good Christian testimony of that in advance, instead of just waiting for it to happen and hoping that you have the right words?
Yeah, the hot coals are dumped in your lap, and you're hoping that you're still going to handle it the right way, right? You know, instead of like it's like stubbing your toe at 2 in the morning,
Yeah.
right? You stub your toe at 2 in the morning when you go in the bathroom. What it comes out of your mouth matters, and I failed in that tower, getting that Lego in the middle of the foot, and you,
I had a vacuum cleaner last night. It
there
wasn't
you
supposed
go.
to be there.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, the words that come out of your mouth, you hope they're gosh darn, right? It's
Right.
whatever, But it's just, the church needs like the community of the church, the body. It needs to make deposits as a whole. And what do I mean? Deposits with time, effort, finances, whatever, because you're going to have to withdraw at some time,
Mhm.
right? But not everyone can withdraw at the same time, or else the church goes under. But it has to have a body of people who are there to, whether it's helping people move, right? Or being there when taking care of somebody when they have cancer, or stepping up when somebody has a need financially, right? If everyone's taking all the time and not depositing, like everyone goes to church to be served. No, you are there to serve,
Mhm.
right? You're there to glorify God, and you're there to plug in to a bigger part of the body so that you can, okay, alone you are a finger. Now together you're a hand on a
Yes.
body that can do stuff, right? So a finger by itself can't do anything, but attached to a hand and a form and an arm, it can do stuff. And that's how we have to start looking at the church, and how we really need to start plugging in.
Well, this is a parallel model to what we were talking about earlier with the government, and people just wanting the government to do everything for them, and get a free ride, and not have any responsibility to do anything for themselves or take care of themselves, which is, this country was built on individualism, and self-responsibility. But we've gotten to the point now where people's expectations are that's what the government does for me, so I don't have to do it. And I think we can fall into the same trap in the church. And I think there's some people who are in the world, Christians, who when they're in the world they see this and they see it as a problem, but when they go to church on Sunday, they don't recognize the same issue. And so I'm really glad that you brought it up, because maybe it opens some people's eyes, or it opens up the eyes of people that people listening today would talk to about this, is that, yeah, this is not just all about taking. And I think that goes back also to the pastor relationship, to like, hey, what can I give to my pastor, even if it's just encouragement. You think about people in their daily walks in life, and I could say the same thing for myself, is, I'll be at work and I'm thinking to myself, does anybody really even care what I'm doing here? Does it make a difference to anybody? It's not that I'm looking for adulation, but every once in a while, it's nice.
It's a legitimate question,
Yes,
right?
that a pastor would hear the same thing. Like every once in a while, someone say, "Hey, I really appreciate what you're doing. I know it's a sacrifice what you're doing for this church. I know the job's not easy. I know it can be lonely, as we talked about earlier, but I appreciate you and I thank you for that." Just a 30 seconds would make such a big difference. And I don't think people do that. They just don't think to do it.
Well, because they're lost in self, right? That's
Yep,
basically
that's
what,
right.
what happens. So one of the reasons, and where we devolved, is you used to have to be a good neighbor, because when your house was on fire, your neighbors were the ones that started bringing buckets of water to help put it out.
That's right.
There was no insurance. When your house built down, your neighbors dropped what they were doing and helped you rebuild it. And then we came up with insurance and government, and everyone became jerks and self-absorbed and stopped giving grace and stopped being loving thy neighbor, right? And got lost in themselves where they don't even know who lives around them anymore.
That's right.
Right. That's because of the government machine and insurance and all these other things that we're talking about. So no one has to be a good person anymore. No one has to be kind. No one has to invest in one another because there's a social program for it.
There was an interconnectedness when I grew up, and maybe you had the same experience. So it wasn't the same that my parents had, because they had it even more. But I do remember the neighborhood I grew up in, and we all knew each other. The kids all played together. The parents got together and had different events that happened where the entire neighborhood was involved, and we looked out for one another. And we love one another as a neighborhood. It was a wonderful experience, and I don't see that. I do know my neighbors, but I don't see that same mutual dependency where we really relied upon each other, and we knew we could count on each other. It's like you used to see the TV shows, and somebody would come to the door and ask to borrow a cup of sugar. Now, it doesn't happen anymore, and I'm sure people are still running out of sugar or other things, but nobody has that relationship. Or people would just come over to the house. I remember when I was a kid, one of the neighborhood mothers, or a couple of them, would come over and have coffee in the morning, just walk in the back door like it was their own house. And that was the sort of relationship that people had. And I think, Jay, the hard thing is that once that is broken, like once that's not generationally passed down anymore, how does a kid know to live like that? How does a kid know to grow up and reestablish that? I mean, we can teach them, but it's not cultural anymore. And it's a very sad thing to me. And it comes with a great price.
Well, and that's what we're trying to build here, right? That's what we're trying to build here in our community, is a place where we have coffee together in the morning, where you can come and get a gallon of milk or a stick of butter or whatever you need out of our fridge, because we have abundance. We have 195 birds here right now, 44 egg birds and 151 meat birds.
Yeah.
And then 8 cows and 4 hogs, soon to be 6 hogs. And, so, we're trying to build that. But what I find is that most people just want to be waited on. They're so used to it. They don't want to get involved. They don't want to put in the work. They don't want to invest in something. I don't know if they've been hurt too many times. They've been too jaded. They sit on their couch and they do nothing. They just do nothing. They do nothing. They sit in their house and they feel sorry for themselves and they do freaking nothing. They invest in no one. They do nothing. And it drives me crazy. Of course your life sucks. Of course you're lonely. Of course you have all these things. You're not investing in anyone.
It reminds me of the story of the little red hen and how everybody expected to take part in it without participating in the production of it. And I think it's the same way, and it's a frustrating thing because you're trying to build something, and you know what the model is, and God tells us that there's dignity in work. It's why the Bible admonition is that if you don't work, you don't eat, and that was there for a reason, and it's because of the laziness and the sloth that we see around us, and that doesn't happen when you're involved and you're invested. And whether it's a physical labor in a place like yours where you're inviting people to come and help out and then to share in the bounty, or whether it's just investing emotionally. Some people may not be able to do that, but they can do something other than sit in their house. They can go and visit somebody, and if they can't get out of the house, they could call somebody on the phone and encourage them, pray with them, share scripture with them. There's lots of things that people can do, but I think we've been lulled into complacency, and part of it has to do, and sadly, but it's human nature, with the abundance and the ease of the easy life that we've had in America for so long, that we have grown complacent and we've lost touch with what got us there. And that's pretty much the story of the Bible. We've seen it in Israel where things were really good, and then people got complacent. They started worshiping other idols and turning away from God. And then all of a sudden calamity fell upon them, and they had to relearn these lessons over and over and over again. And it's a frustrating thing to see it, but it's also a hard thing to solve.
Yeah, well, here we are, 200 plus years into our existence as a country, and we're having to learn it.
We are, and the sad thing is that there was a time when these lessons were passed along generationally, and so that's why the country was so strong. And when Tocqueville went across the country and visited with people, and he said that the people are strong, and it's not that they're all educated in, like, with official education, but they know so much because it's been passed down to them. And he noticed that's what made the country strong, was the strength of the people in their character and their willingness to work and their common sense. And those are things that we've lost as a nation, sadly. Not that everyone's lost it, but that was a national characteristic of the United States of America. And I don't think people look at the country anymore and say that.
Well, we were frontier. We were a frontier country. We were frontiers. People went and came and explored, and with that certain type of independence, and now we become another European entitlement state, which has just totally gutted our spirit.
It's been disastrous for us, and I think we can even see it if you can look back in increments of 5 years, and you can see the difference. This wouldn't have been acceptable 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and you see what's happened and how far we've fallen in such a short period of time. It's really distressing to see that. But I thank you for what you're doing, and you and I have talked about it. I've been out to your place to visit. It's been too long since we've been, but I know what you're doing. I know the model that you're doing there, and I just encourage you, and I encourage other people who are listening right now to find out what Jay's doing and to replicate that in your own communities, because really it's hearkening back to what made America strong and wonderful and God-fearing. And it wasn't that we had things perfect in this country. We had lots of problems. We fought wars. We lost people. We had natural disasters. But God blessed this country with such great abundance and with such love. And then America was able to be a blessing to the rest of the world, and particularly in the foundation, the reestablishment of Israel. America was a big part of that. And God told us that if we bless Israel, that we will be blessed. And I believe that happened. And unfortunately, we've forgotten all of those lessons, or at least culturally, we've forgotten them. And so it does take people like you who are willing to step up and say, here's the way, let's follow it.
Yeah. And this brings me to things that churches do that piss me off. Version 3 is outsourcing all of our strength to faraway lands while our neighborhoods crumble. Missions overseas, missions everywhere else where you can reinvent who you are for a weekend or a week and put on your Christian face, and your neighbors, know exactly who you are, and you come home and you go back to being yourself, but you were something when you were there. And we wonder why this country, the foundation's crumbling, because we've outsourced all of our strength everywhere else. Any thoughts?
Yeah, so there's an organization that I really love. It's called Advancing Native Missions, and what their focus is on developing the missionaries within their own countries, and that frees up the people who would normally be going. And I don't want to take anything away from people who do missions, because I do think it's important. But if you develop that mission work within the country and let them carry their own weight with support, it frees up the people who would normally be traveling there from here to work in their own communities, or at least in their own states or their own nation where there is great need. And you're right. I mean, look at how things are falling apart here. So if we think we can continue on this trajectory the way this country's going, there will come a time when we are completely unable to serve that function to the rest of the world because there just won't be any resources to do it. So I think that the smart thing is to focus on making us strong, and then the ways that we can support people natively, as this one organization does, to go out and work in their own countries where you don't have this cultural barrier to overcome because you live there and you understand it. You can be more effective more quickly. I think that's probably the best model.
Yeah, and more credible and way more effective because you're there every day,
That's right.
24/7 from the population.
That's right.
You mean to talk about where we're at now, you mean there's going to come a time when they won't let people go to church?
I think that I
That
certainly
just happened.
that's coming. I mean, in a place like California, it's not unheard of, and we saw what happened during COVID, where a lot of churches were shut down by the state. Now, some churches made the decision to shut themselves down, but a lot of churches were shut down by the state, and some people.
There were champions.
We
Ken
saw the guy.
Graves.
We saw the guy up in Canada as well, who said, "Get out of here,
Yeah.
you Nazis! Get out of my
Archer.
church."
Yeah, Arter.
That's right. And
Pulaski, I
so
think.
yes, yes, that's right. And so there were models, and I've interviewed a few people from churches who stood up, but we've seen now that the state has tested the waters of control over the church, and they have seen that they were largely successful in telling people, well, maybe you can get together, but you can't sing. You can't worship. We're going to tell you the terms on which you can gather. And this is a dangerous experiment that took place, and I think by and large, as a country, we failed. So yes, I do believe that attack is coming, and they've already proven to themselves that if they have the right crisis, I'll put that in quotation marks, that they can control even the church, which was really unthinkable not so many years ago.
Well, when you just look at how we failed, I am ashamed at what I've allowed to happen in America under my watch as an adult, as an able-bodied man. I allowed them to keep Walmart open and shutter all the small businesses. I allowed them to close the church, although my church that I went to did not close. Ken Graves stood strong and said, "Go ahead and send the National Guard if you want. We'll be right here." The amount of sadness I have for my nation. There was a time in my life where I made America a false idol, right? Because when I was 20 years old and I was a thug, and the wake up call came for me, I didn't believe in God at the time. I gave myself to America. I'm going to serve America because at least in Massachusetts back, I was born in 1972. They still raised patriots then because that's where it happened. I mean, there is John Quincy Adams' house. There's John Adams' house. There's Paul Revere's. Here's the Freedom Trail. Here's Bunker Hill. Here is where this country was started, right? So it was all in your face. And this was before everyone in Massachusetts had taught all of our forefathers were just the worst people on the planet, right? And, to come from that environment where I was raised, and then now to be in a place where everyone is taught to hate those forefathers, Rob. To I just George Washington rolling in his grave, Samuel Adams rolling in his grave, all the guys from World War II and North Korea and World War One, and everyone who won this country and the Indian Wars and everything else, and the Revolution, the Civil War, so on and so forth. It's just so sad what we've allowed to happen here, because all of them would have fought way sooner than we did.
I think you mentioned John Adams, and there's one of his quotes that's a favorite of mine, and I refer to it often on the air because I never heard it as a kid growing up, but I discovered it as an adult. And he said, and this is a very close paraphrase. He said that the Constitution was meant only for a moral and a religious people, and it's not suitable for the governance of any other. And it's why this country, not that every person had to be religious, but that they had to recognize that was the foundation and of the moral greatness of the country, and the success was based on that. And it's why the Constitution could be a pamphlet, and some atrocity like Obamacare had to be 3,000 pages. It speaks exactly to that.
Past and reconciliation on like a discrepancy,
Yes.
like where, I mean, the way that whole thing, everything went down, that was what broke our system. Like everyone wants to know why people can't go out, like, you know, Tip O'Neill and, you know, whoever would go out to drinks after, you know, debating on stage, and because they used to make sausage.
That's
and
right.
then Obamacare came up and it showed that they could be tricky and they didn't need the other side. They just needed just enough. And there was no more compromise needed. And that's when the sausage started being made. And that's when tyranny was born.
Yes, it was a steamroller approach, and it's like, we're going to do this. We're going to cram it down your throat any way that it takes. And of course, I think it really exemplified the and I want to go to another fine point of our Constitution, and something that was a disaster, which was the 17th Amendment, which made senators directly elected. The way the country was set up, and this goes back to federalism, was that the states were to appoint their senators to represent the interests of the states. And so when I saw Obamacare, and it's happened many, many times after that, that the senators from certain states voted against their interests and went with a national political agenda, because they're representing the national political agenda and not the states. And that never would have happened. You wouldn't have had that because those
I did not know that. Thank you for dropping that knowledge on me.
Yes, it was part of the progressive movement, and it was it made the senators directly elected instead of representatives of the states and representing the state's interests. And so I have seen that a number of times here in Virginia, where we have two turncoats, I will call them domestic enemies, as senators, Mark Warner and Tim Kaine, who have constantly voted against the interests of Virginians and in favor of national political Democrat interests. And it makes me sick to think that they could, and they should have been, if we had adhered to the original intent of the founders, accountable to the state and to do the will of the state and not the federal government.
Yeah, I don't think people have enough loyalty to their states anymore. Like, meaning that, you know, by all means, during the formation of this country, Virginians and Boston, you know, people from Massachusetts and New Yorkers, etc., they had a terrible loyalty to their states because they were all like they were all designed to be micro countries.
Yes.
You know, and we've lost that with what we've become. And I think that is part of the problem. We've lost our identity. And the only way we're going to get this back is through the church, right? We have to fix the men, that fix the families, that fix the church, that fixes the community, that fixes the city, that fixes the state, that fixes the country. And if we turn America back to God, holy smokes, the whole world turns back to God, and post-millennial is true. You know, I firmly believe in them. All you froze on me, Rob. Hopefully your wife didn't pull the plug on you. I'm like, man, he's giving me the stone cold killer face. But we'll give him a second for his internet signal to normalize here. Up, he dropped. I'm sure he'll be back. But what a great show. I really always enjoy my conversations with Rob. He's a brilliant man. We share a lot in common, not everything. We don't share all the same beliefs probably, but a great man to, you know, he's prayed for me many times, and I always need prayer. But just a guy to sit down and just try to figure stuff out with. And, you know, part of my war council. And I think we all, you know, I hope you all are investing in people to build your war councils, right? Again, war councils is a very real thing that we preach here, and it's having people that are going to hold you accountable outside of your wife. Should your wife be in your war council? Absolutely. Should your husband be in your war council? Absolutely. But you better have some sisters, if you're a female, who are in your war council, and guys, you better have guys in your council who are there to hold you accountable when you start pulling your junk, we'll say. So I think we'll see if Rob I just heard the beep. We'll see if he comes back. I haven't seen him showing up on my screen. There seems to be a delay. Maybe he'll. I mean, I haven't seen him yet. When he comes back on, I'll welcome him. But what an incredible show! What a great time! I hope you guys enjoyed this this treat, and I hope to have Rob back on more. I just find conversation with him to be very edifying and challenging at times. So, all right, everyone. God bless you. God bless your family. Remember that service now is at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. There's no more morning service here. It's only at 7 p.m. So God bless you, and I will see you for service on Sunday at 7 p.m. Thank you, Claudia. Love you, you and your family. I hope all is well. Have a great weekend. See everyone on Sunday. God bless.